If you are someone that suffers with what we believe to be mold-associated illness, and you have tried binders, you have tried clearances, you have tried, high dose vitamin D, you've tried remedying your situation and you're still stuck, then this video might give you some answers. So I was one of those people that are struggling with a hypersensitivity. I have susceptible genetics, which we'll cover in other videos. I have a whole health history of immune dysregulation with regards to autoimmune from being younger, spinal issues, brain tumor, many different things. So I am definitely a susceptible individual. So I wouldn't want to say I'm a majority, but what I will tell you is that the literature, and I am a science guy, is that over 23% of people have genetics that predispose them to hypersensitivity to things like molds, mycotoxins, endotoxins, biotoxins. And what happens is that at this lower level, it stimulates the immune system and it puts it into overdrive. It's like a chronic inflammatory response, okay? And so in a normal individual, you can ingest obviously mold or spores or biotoxins in a few different ways. So it could be inhalation, it could be through food, it could be through the skin. And so a normal route of that would be your immune system will be able to tag it, will be able to deal with it, be able to process it and then clear it, okay? In people like myself, that process doesn't happen as well. So what can happen is these biotoxins, however we want to call them, can get into cells and they can travel between cells without the immune system tagging them or picking them up. And so the longer they're in their system, the more cells they can pass between. So therefore, the more dysregulated more and more systems can become. And so that's why the symptomology of mold illness or illness from water damaged buildings can be so wide. Why can someone have neurological psychiatric disorder based symptoms, which can look like an early onset dementia, compared to someone who has chronic joint pain or has chronic fatigue issues or has skin rashes or whatever it might be, or maybe like me, you had a few of those different things that come up. And so what I want you to really understand is that there is something around the understanding of iron and other minerals within the body that you need to understand. What I see on nearly every panel when I look at people that are in moldy buildings or in water damaged buildings, or they've left that exposure but they're struggling to get better, is that when we look at their minerals with regards to iron, ferritin, transferritin, things like copper, red blood cell magnesium, when we look at hemoglobin, when we look at hematocrit and other red blood cells, we can see the interplay of them being very, very disturbed. And so many people will say to me, yeah, but I'm actually iron anemic. And so therefore they think, well, taking iron is going to fix their problem, which it doesn't, right? That's the same as I have a headache and I take a painkiller. Really, if you're iron anemic, what you're telling us is that things like vitamin A is not working, or retinol is not working for you, that system. So then we'd have to go downstream at a cell level to understand why that's happening. So what we generally find, and I don't want to get into too much complexities of biochemistry, but if you are someone that struggles to get better and you've tried lots of things, this is something to pay attention to. So what I often see is that stored levels of iron within organs can be usually high. So what does that mean? Because in every cell of your body, or majority of cells in your body, you have what we call mitochondria. Okay, and mitochondria, just stick with me, are like the batteries. Okay, they make everything work. For you to have energy, for you to blink, for you to click your fingers, for your heart to beat, you need mitochondria to produce energy. Okay, and part of that energy production cycle, you need iron. Okay, so you need iron. Iron is good. That's why when people are seen as iron anemic, people give them iron, because without iron, you're gonna, obviously one of the main issues that we see is fatigue. But here's the thing. What we see is that if you have too much access to iron being stored, or you have an issue with regards to balancing iron, copper, magnesium, and these other delicate things that you have going on, then what happens is you start pushing too much iron through this cellular process to create energy. And what happens, it becomes heavily reactive, heavily reactive. We all know if you take too much iron, you know, at a low level, you could get some gut upset, but on a higher level, it could be very toxic, right? So I'm not saying iron is bad, it is absolutely essential, but what happens if you're pushing too much iron through your cells, and this happens when you're inflamed, okay? When you're inflamed, you always see people's things like ferritin go up, their iron levels start changing, their balances. So we start creating this inflammatory response in the cell, and then that inflammatory response in the cell triggers an inflammation cascade, okay? And so then that starts communicating to other cells around the body. And this is where your symptomology starts to show up. So I don't want to get too much more into complexity, but I would say if you are someone, for instance, that's been in a position that you've been in mold, or you're in mold at this moment in time, and you're seeing this progression of symptoms over time, even though you're taking binders or even though you're taking, you know, clearance supplements. And what I found personally, and I'm someone who was exposed on and off for over 10 years, and the last 2021 was the year that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back, is that I just got less and less resilient to things. So my skin would flare up easier, my brain fog would come on quicker, my energy, my endurance would struggle faster. I couldn't lose water weight, like I was just very bloated and swollen all the time. And like these things just got worse and worse until you just think, well, what's going on? Like people, oh, is it my age? Is it my genetics or whatever it might be? And we start blaming things outside of us, right? So what I started to understand was like, well, hang on a minute, until I can turn around what's going on at this cell level, how I can look at, you know, a very simple blood test in order to look at the balance between these different things that I've discussed in this video and correct them. There's an argument that going for binders or heavy clearance will be too much for your body now, and it will create more inflammatory responses. Because remember, when you start binding things, when you start, you know, putting antimicrobials in or antifungals, you create a lot of waste, which your body has to deal with. So that is all to do with oxidative stress. So if them systems are already overwhelmed, it's going to feel very, very rough for you. Okay, and that's what happened to me. I couldn't take any clearance. I couldn't even handle one capsule in the morning before it would ruin me for the rest of the day in my sleep, right? I couldn't handle binders, couldn't do any of those things. So what I've started to come up with is different protocols depending on what phase people are in order to help them understand, okay, well, how do we open up this system first? How do we get the cells balanced? How do we make sure that they've got good drainage? How do we make sure that their system is capable of moving things before we get into moving things? Because I think most people live in this world where it's immediate. It's like, I've got to get rid of this thing. You know, you read something online, everyone's an expert. And by no means do, you know, even though I've been doing this work 15 years, I don't claim to be an expert. I'm a problem solver. And so the problem I had was that even though I was getting better, taking all these supplements and doing things, it was never quite there. And that bothered me, right? Because I'm a science guy and a geek. So I'm like, this should be doing better than it is. So if you have that kind of inclination, the same as I do, then, you know, please let me know. I'm more than happy to, you know, talk to you about Mold Fix that we have coming up, which is going to be a mini course masterclass really of understanding your home environment, your internal environment, and where you need to start, what protocols you need to build in order to start recovering, rebuilding that resilience. So hopefully that video was useful for you, and I will speak to you soon.